Well, I guess I'll mark this as a part 2 to my last video on morality and ethics. Got some very good comments on the last video. I mean, most people got what I'm talking about, that commented anyway. Reading comments on other videos relating to the subject indirectly, and just the whole nature of conversations that take place when it comes to the subject of an objective morality, or even ethics and morality in general. There isn't, I mean, so far, I haven't been able to sell this idea that there's really two parts to be discussed, that you have to really separate the two. That there is when you're talking about the absolutes or the objective morality, it's very different than the morality that has to be constructed for the sake of the service of the social environment, the requirement, what social progress requires, what social civility requires. And that's a different kind of law, a different kind of ethical responsibility, however we want to put it, that's sort of just based on the general principle of mutual respect, that there's not going to be respect for the law, there's not going to be respect for each other, unless you have to give it to get it. You have to be willing to give respect to expect respect. And I suppose in any discussion where you're discussing morality with religious people, or people who've gained their morality from some dogmatic or arbitrary source that really doesn't give them any cause to have great confidence, and where their own hypocrisy is so transparent. I mean, the Christians don't want to impose the entire morality of their Bible on even themselves. They don't want to write the Bible into law. They just want to write the parts that don't impinge on their own freedom into law. I mean, if we had a law that only poor people could drink, alcohol, they wouldn't like that. But basically that's what the Bible says. You give alcohol to the poor to comfort them in their discomfort. There's all kinds of, that they wouldn't want a law that outlawed divorce, but they're certainly willing to pass a law that outlaws abortion, because they're not giving away anything. They're not giving a right away that they have any intention of using. And so that's sort of where they've broken the ethical construct, the social construct of mutual respect, because they're expecting respect, but they're not willing to give any. They're willing to take other people's rights as long as they have no use for them. But they're not really willing to be consistent. And so they're saying they have a moral guide, but that guide, they pick and choose, they cherry pick. And that sort of demonstrates a lack of confidence in that guide. And so they should have enough respect for human diversity to acknowledge that they don't really have the authority. They don't have their morality doesn't have the integrity for them to have a freedom or willingness to impose it on others. It's always going to be a tricky line, because if I establish that there is an objective morality and I become confident in it, I'm going to be compelled to impose it. I don't mean in a dictatorial kind of way, I just mean through the democratic process. If I can convince most people to accept that morality, I might feel comfortable in imposing it. And that's always a tricky line. Currently, I don't believe hunting is a moral act. I don't believe it's an ethical act. Or meat eating. Hunting, I might go if the majority goes with banning it or curtailing it. Might go with that. Vegetarianism, I would say maybe a consensus. There'd have to be a 3/4 vote or something. So it's always trying to figure out. That's part of what I was trying to explain about this. The structure of a constitution is sort of defining certain places where you really have to have a consensus to limit liberty, and then other places in the law where you don't. And so the Constitution is basically an outline of the parts where you require that 3/4 kind of, or 2/3 judgment of before there's a change in law, and then there's these other areas where we can afford to go with just a mere majority, 50%. And I think that's a reasonable construction for a society. It's just that we don't respect it, because we've sort of put very biased and people on the courts, and the courts are the ones that decide what the Constitution says and what it means, and they've basically destroyed it. And I'm saying that from the liberal point of view. There's lots of conservatives that see the same thing, but that's the same thing with the rhetoric you get in the media. They'll say, oh, the reporters are all liberal. Well, I'll make the argument that the owners are all conservative. So which one has more influence on the media is an interesting question. And I'd say the courts have perverted the Constitution to destroy the liberality that's supposed to be defended in it. So I'm getting off subject, so let's get back to the objective part. So I'm just saying that I'm trying to steer the conversation to accept the fact that there's two different moralities to be discussed. The social contract is one type of morality, one type of ethics. And then the other argument is objective ethics or objective morality, which is a different philosophical discussion entirely, because it doesn't have anything to do with a necessity for having social order. It has to do with true right and wrong and defining it. So there was some, like I said, some good comments. The word empathy came up, and my only argument with empathy is that gets a little tricky, because empathy is basically an emotional reaction. And I think we would tend to try to avoid basing our morality on what we feel about things. We have to really be careful to make sure that it's a thought process and not a conditioned response, not a response of our culture or our upbringing or some other aspect, because then it just becomes corrupted by that judgment. Because sometimes our empathy isn't as, we love the kitten, we hate the rat. I mean, that kind of thing. Where I would think an objective morality would appreciate that the rat and the cat probably should have similar rights. All right. The other thing was the idea that a universal code of ethics. There's no element in the universe that's sitting there appreciating these things. That it can only be appreciated internally or subjectively by each individual, and therefore it can't exist, this code of ethics. And my argument would be is the speed of light doesn't change if we're ignorant of it. For the centuries that human man didn't know what the speed of light was, or even what light was, it didn't mean that the speed of light didn't exist. And so I don't think it really has anything to do with the fact that we are attempting to perceive or understand the universal code of ethics. There isn't some part of the universe that's thinking them or feeling them, just like no part of the universe is thinking or feeling the speed of light. It just is a fact of the reality of existence. And there's a certain, just in existing, everything that exists has an interaction, has a quality associated with its existence. It has an impact. It has a definable efficiency in its interaction, a definable productivity, a definable qualitative meaning. And that's what we're trying to ascertain, is the optimum interaction, the optimum, what is its potential, and how much of that potential did it realize. Someone else brought termed it moral calculus, and that's really what I'm hoping to bring it down to. Is an equation, a raw, cold equation where we can punch in some numbers and get an answer. And they also use the a comparison to insurance actuarial tables. And that's really what it comes down to is, yeah, let's figure out what the ethics are and the probabilities, and we'll know, like I said, we can't know all the subtle interactions, we can't know all the permutations, but we can, over time, create this net impetus towards the productive, towards doing things that are going to optimize the structure of the system and our interaction in it. So, sort of redundant, but important clarifications, I think.